Welcome to First in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alton Gansky, coming to you from my deep underground lair in the central part of California. And I'm the author of Wounds and a couple of history books recently, and a whole bunch of other novels, including The Girl, which is part 4 of the Harbingers series. And you can get that on, you can get the physical book through Amazon now, and you can get the novella. It's a short book. And you can get the ebook starting May 1st, I believe.
Very exciting. And this is the 3rd in the series, correct?
This is the 4th in the series.
The 4th.
I'm the caboose, man.
That's right. Batting cleanup. That's right.
I am the caboose. I got to talk so the thing will switch over to me. There it is. And you can see it's just a little novella, 2-hour read.
Fun. I think we need more novellas. I think that's what this world needs, is a novella. So maybe that should be one of our publishing terms, is the difference between a novel, a novella, a short story, and all that. But we can maybe table that, since we've got a different...
Yeah.
Unless you want to do that now and table the other publishing term you had up your sleeve.
No, I think we'll just, you remind me, and we'll do it next time around, because I need to research some of the other terms, because there's a novel, novella. For a while, they were using a term called a novelette. Then there's, of course, short stories and flash fiction and other such things. So
Microfiction.
Yeah, I know the numbers, word count are never the same. It depends where you go, and they'll say, no, this has got to be 60,000 words. This has got to be 40,000. So you're never quite sure. So
I like that you put faith in me to actually remember, to remind you to do something. I'm going to need you to actually remind me to remind you about the publishing term for the week. So that would be helpful.
Well, maybe some of the folks in the Romper Room will send us a note or something next week.
Can always
talk about those.
Maybe they're not as scattered as are we.
Well, at least I'm old enough now I can start blaming my age. Of course, it really started when I was in my 20s, but that's neither here nor there. So,
yeah, I hear that. I've been complaining that I'm getting older and older, and so if I'm old, that makes you doubly old. I would imagine.
I am. I'm not that old, but I can see it from here.
Yeah, you're not even with the binoculars. With the glasses on or off, can you see it?
I was at the dentist doing the, poke and prod and the cleaning and stuff, and I said, "Now you be careful. Now I'm old." And she goes, "Oh, you're not that old. Can I help you get out of the chair?"
Well played.
Yeah.
Well played. Well, I suppose we should probably get on to business here. Our publishing term for the day, kind of an interesting one, a unique one. I didn't see this one coming out of the woodwork. This has surprised me here. So what do you got for us?
Well, that's what I live for, is surprising you and our good folks here. We're going to talk about ISBN. We hear that term a lot, but most of us know very little about it. It stands for International Standard Book Number. International Standard Book Number. And if you look at the back of any recent book, by recent, I mean like in the last 30, 40 years, you will see on the back, down at the bottom, this little white square, and it has a barcode and a number. The ISBN number really refers to the number, not so much the barcode, but they work together these days. And what it is it's an international numbering system, and each country or group of countries has their own rules about this. So the United States ISBN people can't tell publishers in Africa how they have to do it. So, but nonetheless, it's meant to be international, and most follow this. And it's a number you get. If you're self-publishing, you have to either buy one, or if you go through like Amazon, CreateSpace, that kind of thing, or one of the others, Smashwords, for example, will give you an ISBN number. But it will be registered to them. And what it is simply product identification. It's very similar to that. The numbers on the back all have a meaning. If it begins with a 0, let me describe it for those that can't see it, that don't have a book handy to look at the back. But there's 4 sets of numbers. The first one is 0 if it's done in English. So the first number tells us the language. So 0 refers to English. The next number on this particular book is 425, and that tells us the publisher's name. So who published the book? Then the next 5 numbers is the product code, tells us what the book product is. And then there's another number at the end of that that makes all the other numbers work together and verifies it. So it's a big thing. I've always thought it destroys the back cover of a book, but it's important. So you can search for books by ISBN numbers. They switched, by the way, to a 13-digit long ISBN number, and that was back in 2007. It used to be 10 digits. Now it's 13 digits long. That many books being printed, I suppose. So that's our publishing term for the day, an ISBN number, International Standard Book Number, and all published books, whether from traditional publishers or self-published books, have to have an ISBN number.
Very interesting.
Well, let me back off that for just a second. I'm sorry, Aaron. Let me back off that for just a second. Amazon uses an ASIN number. They don't care about ISBN numbers. So if you're doing an ebook, for example, you don't have a physical book. Ebooks still get ISBN numbers normally, but if Amazon's the only one doing it, they use I think it's an AISN or an ASIN number, which is very similar. And the A, you want to guess what the A stands for with Amazon?
Is it antibiotics?
No, it's Amazon.
Oh.
Least I think
Amazon starts with A as well. Now, is this a capital A or a lowercase a? Okay. All right.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, you ask a stupid question, I guess. So, but that's interesting. I hadn't realized that about Amazon and the ISBN. So, some pretty interesting stuff there. So, learning something new. Look at me, always learning something new here. That's why I have you on the podcast. Teach me something.
You with that fancy MFA in creative writing.
I've got an MFA in making stuff up.
I've got a master's degree in lying for a living.
Yeah. I got an MFA in BS. Is that how it works? I don't know. I don't know. Did we lose our clean rating right there on iTunes?
I don't know.
Oh, it's
I'm
late.
already getting punchy, and it's early here, so I don't know what our
man, I haven't been sleeping because Daredevil. I'm going to blame Daredevil for my lack of sleep. So
we better be careful. We get lost on that. We'll be talking about that tonight instead. So.
Yeah, that's true. So let's get into it. Well, actually, that's a fairly decent segue. One of the interesting things about the show is its realistic depiction of fight scenes. It's fight scenes, and it's interesting because when people get in a fight, they actually get hurt, and when they're hurt, they move slowly and they breathe more heavily because they're winded. You run out of breath when you beat a guy in the face 114 times. So, there's a physical toll to these characters in this show, and in the same way the characters in our book, we need to think of their physical nature as well. It's one of the things that's often neglected, and I noticed that a lot of beginning writers want to talk about what their characters look like, which is important. My friend the Fly is back, by the way, so if you see me waving, it's the Fly. It's the Fly.
Having a religious experience.
I am a little bit charismatic here. So
yeah, bless you. I see that hand. Yeah,
lifting hands. Yes, and losing my train of thought all at the same time. So physical description is not exactly what we're talking about here, though it is part of it. The physical description is simply what a character looks like on the outside. But what we're really interested about talking about tonight is what the character is made up inside of their body, their biological makeup, the bones and the tendons and the heart and the lungs. And of course, if they're human, we can assume that they've got the 2 lungs and that they've got a heart that beats, etc. But our physiology varies so widely from person to person. Each of us has our own little maladies, our own little, our bum knee or a trick elbow or whatever the case may be, carpal tunnel syndrome for most of our listeners, I would imagine. We understand these aches and pains, and we need to kind of remember to put some of these physical descriptions into our characters and think about what their physical body is like. And that's a great way to take your characters, to take your readers rather, and put them into your character's skin so that they can continue to experience the narrative as if they were there, as if they were participating, rather than simply being told about, a great adventure. They get to experience that adventure.
Yeah, I suppose one way we could say this is there is physical description, which is good. You have to have that. And we'll talk about that some. So when we talk about the physicality in fiction, we do talk a little bit about the way they look, the way they move, and the things that they feel that you're talking about. But also in the course of the story, they will experience things physically. And then back when we talked about emotion, getting emotional with the characters, we described emotion as being the breakdown of, or the combination of two words, E meaning in, and motion. And so it's motion within, that all emotions are really physical sensations. And that's what makes them so important. So no matter what a character is going through in the book, happiness, sadness, love, loss, whatever it might be, there's going to be a physical response to it. So I want to keep that at the forefront in our descriptions also.
Absolutely. And that's actually something that we'll talk about as well next week is emotions, the emotional side of our characters. So right now we're talking about the physical side, and they are linked, as you just said. The emotion is going to affect the physical, and we need to keep that in mind. But what we're talking about today is that physical experience. So what does it feel like when your character walks or when they run? Are they able to run? Are they fast or are they slow? Does it feel like when they fight? If they're in an accident, what is that? What are those sensations? Are there illnesses that plague them? Some sort of diseases, some long-lasting effects. Some diseases have long-lasting effects. And what I encourage our writers to do is to think about not only the history of our characters' occupation and education and psychology, etc., but what major events have transpired in their life that has affected them physically, and how do they carry themselves now as a result of that? Have they spent their life training to play sports? Are they in very good shape, and therefore they are able to run quickly? They're able to play sports. They're able, when they get in a fight, they can handle themselves. Those are the types of questions that you kind of want to ask yourself, and you could even do kind of a timeline. Excuse me with this. Why does it always want to land on my nose? That's the fly. Why does it have to land on my nose?
Reminds me of that old joke, country western song, Mama Hand Me a Hammer, There's a Fly on Papa's Head, or something like that.
You're going to end up being the old man who swallowed a fly here in just a minute. So wouldn't that be fantastic?
And it looks like maybe we lost Aaron there. Waiting for someone to join. Yeah, Aaron's dropped out here. So we'll give him a minute to come back if he can do that. There is a slim possibility that it will kick me off since he initiated the call. So if that happens, sit tight, folks. We'll come back to you and see if we can't make it all right. So maybe the fly got into the computer. We don't know. Fly that's been buzzing around. So I'm uncertain if you're hearing me out there, Bethany or Molly Joe. Can you picking me up? And Aaron, looks like Aaron's coming back now. And I see his picture, and I don't see him yet. We'll give you the blow-by-blow here. And still nothing. We live in a wonderful age. We can do a lot of things, but nothing's perfect. And I've seen this happen on other shows where the person just gets bumped off for apparently no reason. Happens with Skype as well as Google Hangouts. So, and we're waiting. See, in radio, they call this dead air. And it's a horrible thing in radio because they're afraid you'll move right past their station to another station, lose all those advertising dollars. So, all righty, good. Molly Jo tells me that she can still hear me. So maybe I just push on a little bit here and wait for him to connect with us until it either kicks me off and we have to reboot everything, or something else happens. Looks like, and there he's back.
Oh, you got me now?
I've got you now. You lose to the fly or what? I'm getting ready to call 911.
When I got right back on it, I said, oh, that's the fly's fault. I'm going to blame that on the fly. And you're like, I don't see him yet.
Yeah, no,
so
you were
watching you live. Oh man, what a miserable little thing that was. So I
was doing a little stand-up routine,
That's fantastic. I can't wait to hear it on the podcast.
Yeah,
so
it's gripping.
I'll have to download that tonight. So, not sure what happened with that. So, okay. Well, I'm not sure where I left off. Somehow lost my train of.
Well, you were talking about the importance of not just giving physical descriptions, which we're going to talk about, and how to do that in a good way. And I want to give a few examples of that. But you're also talking about past experiences in a character's life that may play a role in what they do. So, for example, if someone has had a badly broken leg, let's say, and it's all healed up, but they still can't move like they used to move. Maybe something like that. But that's gonna play into the storyline, or if somebody has illness. And I'm thinking about it, Stephen King did a great job about what's it called, insomnia. I can't remember now, but it was an elderly man. He was living alone, and he was dealing with all the things that elderly men deal with, including not being able to sleep, and he began to see things. So, but he did a great job describing what it was like to be old and alone. Yeah. And a lot of it had to do with the physical nature of the man, whether or not he could sleep, what he ate, that sort of thing. So, where do you want us to go from here, Aaron?
Well, I wanted to mention, though, that this physical, these bits of physical history do kind of affect our characters and how they feel about themselves as well, and how they work through them. I like to tell the story of this gentleman I saw at the gas station. This was some years ago. And he's out pumping gas, and on his left leg, he's got the halo brace. You know what I'm talking about, with the pins going into his leg. Mm-hmm. And I think that was like on his shin or something like that. But he's got like the double halo. He's got pins going into his leg, and he's like hopping around and hobbling on his crutch, trying to pump the gas. And his girlfriend, I'm guessing, is sitting in the driver's side with her head out the window going, "Babe, I can pump the gas. I can do this. Why don't you just relax and let me pump the gas?" And he goes, I can do this. I can do this. And he took this empty can and he threw it toward the trash can, and it just bounced and fell out. And he said, he said in a word that would definitely cost us our clean rating. But I thought, that might be the right use of that word. That would be appropriate. That's in that sense. So, if they're in some way disabled, do they feel bad about themselves? Do they try and power through it? Are they like me, where they just kind of whine and complain a whole lot so that their wife will take care of them? They milk it for what it's worth? Or is this somebody who's, goes to work with, stitches all through their forehead, just because they're they got to finish their job, they've got to finish their work. So not only their physical history, but also how that affects them now. How do they feel about that is another dimension that we can add to our physical, the physicality of our characters here. So,
which ties into the emotion and the psychology of the character, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes that physicality sets the stage for some of the characters. I'm thinking of Nero Wolfe. I don't know if you've had opportunity to read Rex Stout's Nero Wolfe books. Came out in the 30s, 40s, and so on. And then someone, after Rex Stout died, picked up the mantle and kept going with him. Those not familiar with Nero Wolfe, he's a detective. They did several television programs. There was a great one. The last one was really, really good. The character that played him died a few years later. But it was just really fabulous. But his physicality makes the whole story. There's two main characters. One's Nero Wolfe. He's a detective who never leaves his home, and he can't be bothered. his right-hand man is Archie Goodwin, and Archie Goodwin is the physical guy. He's the guy that's going to go out and punch someone. He's the guy that carries a gun. Nero Wolfe doesn't do any of that. He deals with orchids and like. But when you read a Nero Wolfe book, as you start seeing the description of him, it's just slowly leaked out through the story from Archie Goodwin's point of view. It's written first person, Archie Goodwin. And he's a very large man. And the first thing you hear about when you hear about Nero Wolfe is not him, but his specially made chair. Now, it's interesting because he describes Nero Wolfe as being almost, being very obese. And the truth is, he's, by today's standards, he's not that heavy. But I guess he was short with that. But he was always described as being an eighth of a ton, weighing an eighth of a ton. Couldn't say he weighed 250 pounds. No. The description was that he was an eighth of a ton. He had a special chair. He loved his beer, which is supposed to explain why he was so heavy, and he always saved the caps, the beer thing. And when he opened it, they would describe how many beer tops off the bottles of beer were in a drawer where he kept them. Of course, the implication is this is why he's this way. And where Archie Goodwin, and this goes against type, he's the tough guy, but he's smart, but he's not brilliant like Nero Wolfe. But Nero Wolfe's the guy that drinks all the beer. Archie Goodwin only drinks milk. And you would think it would be the other way around. So, in describing these pairs, it's almost a Mutt and Jeff kind of thing. The physicality becomes part of the whole story, why they do what they do and why they have the roles that they play. So it can even set up your character.
Oh, absolutely. And it can play a part in your story because Nero Wolfe is not chasing down the bad guy. And if he tries, there's going to be, some hilarity may ensue. So absolutely. And I like what you talk about, like, Nero Wolfe is the beer drinker and Archie Goodwin just drinks the milk, and you get kind of the reversal of the expectations, the subverting reader expectations, finding something that goes against the normal stereotypes, the things that we normally assume, the archetypes of the characters. Find something to kind of twist that a little bit. And you can kind of mix and match and make some really interesting characters that way. But yeah, Nero Wolfe, the physicality of that character is really good. One way that you can establish this, and if this is something that you're trying to wrap your mind around, how do you do this in your book? What's the natural place? Well, I mean, what is it? The old folks home, that Far Side where the storm's coming in and one guy's knee is swollen to like the size of his head and the other person's elbow is the size of a basketball. And well, it looks like a storm's a brewing. And, it's just, you kind of get, it could be something like that to where the weather affects the body. And there is a profound impact. So you can think about the setting. What role does the setting have on your character's physicality? Is it snowing outside? Are they cold? People tend to get sleepy when it's cold. Or is it you get sleepy when it's cold, or you get sleepy when it's hot?
Well, if you're in freezing conditions, sleep is the most dangerous thing because you'll freeze to death if you fall asleep, and it tends to make you very sleepy because the body's tired from shivering. And warmth, heat, like a summer day, saps your energy.
Yeah, mine for sure. Like I thought about for a while getting a job where I worked outside, and my wife is like, well, but you would die. Oh, that's a fair point. I probably would. So I was not built for the outdoors. I can do it in very short bursts, but yeah, when it gets, if it's pushing 95 degrees, I'm not doing much. Like I'm sitting in the house in front of a fan and hoping to make it through till tomorrow. But I do enjoy the cold, but it's interesting. I do have some more aches and pains when the cold rolls around. And I don't know if you've ever been cold for an extended period of time, but where you start to shiver and your body hurts because you've been so shivering, like you wake up sore the next day, like you've just worked out, or heaven forbid you get the stomach flu and then you wake up the next morning and the abdomen is just racked. It's just so tight. And I mean, you've been working out, you've been doing, sit-ups all night long, throwing up, those kinds of things, they play a part, and those types of details really kind of sell our characters, make them more three-dimensional. So one good way to do this is to put them in action. Find a scene. If they're sedentary, get them up and moving. Have them, chase a dog out of their yard. Have them chase down a bad guy. Maybe they're in a fight. Maybe they are dancing. Maybe they are exercising. It could be any of those things. But it can be something like a car crash. There's some sort of injury but make something physical happen so that you have to think about them kind of internally more than just externally. Less what they look like, more like what they feel like. So that's one thing. You want to put them in action. One of the things that you want to do is you want to kind of interpose though as well. You want to bounce back and forth between the physical description and the action that's going on outside of the body. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the mistakes that amateurs make, because they want to front load everything. This is what my character looks like. Here's my character's name. This is where he is, and this is what he looks like. Now let's get on to the story. And that's the worst thing you can do. And if you study the best writers, you realize that they will often set the scene first, then give the description, so that the description has more meaning to it.
It has
some examples of that when I get down. Yeah, we'll get a little further into it. I've got an example of that. Dean Koontz does a great thing in Phantoms in the very early part with that. But yeah, it's important to spread the things out. I'm just going to skip ahead here a little bit. I call it the dripping faucet method, where you give a little bit here, a little bit there. If you study the novels, one of the things that might surprise you, certainly surprises most new writers, is how long it takes sometimes to get to a good description of the main character. They usually don't start off that way. A is for Alibi, Sue Grafton. In fact, all of Sue Grafton's novels, first person. She goes against that, and she just states it right up front, but she does it in such a clever way that it works, but you wouldn't want that in every book. She can pull it off, but it's better to dribble these things out, let the drops fall further. And preparing for this, I was looking through some books, looking how far in to the books before we get a real physical description, much of a physical description. And sometimes it's 10, 12 pages in before we get even close to that.
Yeah. And sometimes not even then. There are some, there are some short stories where you get very little detail about the character and their description, but you'll get one or two. And those one or two, if you pick the right ones, it's really all you need, just to sell the entire story. Just the specifics of the detail is what you want to go for. Imagine going into a doctor. I know I'm kind of hitting the area of pain quite a bit, but it's one of the most tangible experiences that we have, physically speaking. Going into a doctor and you say, I don't feel good. Well, what's wrong? Well, my stomach hurts. Well, how does it hurt? Is it cramping? My kids will even come in. I don't feel good. Can you be more specific? That can be anything. Is it your head? Is it your stomach? Is it your elbow? Is it your pinky? Are we talking hangnail? Are we talking like cancer? Like, I need to know. And so, it's hard to tell. And so they've got to describe, well, it hurts right here. It hurts my stomach. It's cramping, or my head hurts. And well, where on your head? Is it behind the eyes? Is it in the temples? Is it the front? The different types of headaches, goodness knows the good Lord blessed us with all sorts of headaches, the migraines, the clusters, the sinus headaches, and all of those. And they hurt, but they are all different kinds of hurts. I have a buddy of mine. You remember Gil, Pops?
Yeah, Gil.
Yeah, a buddy of mine. He used to never get headaches. And I remember we were teenagers, and he came to me one day and he goes, Aaron, something's wrong. My head hurts. So he probably got a headache. He goes, no, I don't get headaches. It just hurts right here, like it's it's a vice or something, just squeezing my head. I said, bro, that's a headache. And he goes, no, I don't get headaches. It just hurts. Congratulations, you're 17 having your first headache. I'm jealous.
Yeah.
But what kinds of headaches do they get? Doing a little bit of research. Make WebMD your friend. Bookmark it. I think most doctors have it bookmarked. That's always fun to go to the doctor and they're pulling up WebMD. It's like, what am I paying you for? I can do that myself. I've got internet access. So
for the prescription.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Good point. Yeah. So those are all different types of pain. And pain can actually become somewhat familiar to us, right? I don't want to say like it's comforting, but when you've got a pain that you've had for a certain period of time, sometimes it just becomes like this dull background throbbing, and it's not as noticeable, and the character tends to think less about it. My shoulder had rotator cuff tendonitis. Man, I could describe that pain to you. That was all sorts of misery. That was, I think, God's judgment for something. I'm not sure what I did to upset him, but there was this incredible pain. It was like a burning, as if somebody had taken, as if the tendon itself was just on fire and burning, and it throbbed all the way throughout, and it radiated all the way down to my elbow, even down to my fingertips, up into my neck. I couldn't sit comfortably. I couldn't move it. Just rotating my thumb from side to side would just flare up this incredible amount of pain. And that's a very tangible thing. It's very real, but it's very different than my other shoulder. I don't have good shoulders. My other shoulder pops out of socket all the time. I dislocated it as a teenager, and it was out for a week before I realized it. And so now the tendons are all stretched out, and the thing pops. I'll sneeze, and I will dislocate my shoulder, and it hurts. But it's just kind of like, yeah, I know what that hurt is, and I, work it back in the socket, and it's uncomfortable for a while, but I know it, and that there's that familiarity to it. So it's not a big deal. I'm not worried about it, and it kind of fades into the background.
Well, let's move into a few things, if it's okay with you, about some things maybe to avoid when we're talking about physicality and descriptions, and,
Yes.
And maybe even some technique that we can pass on. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I actually have an example page that I can read and show to our viewers, but I'll read it for our audio listeners as well, that we can kind of get to at some point. But for sure, if you want to move into some things to avoid.
Yeah, one thing, and it's a giveaway. A writer is new, and that is the info dump, which we mentioned. So I'm not going to belabor the point, but that's where you just say 5'2", eyes of blue. Has anyone seen my character? Where you just put that stuff up front, and it really has very little context. It is important that we draw a picture of our characters, because if we don't, the reader will. And then if you put it in too late, then they'll develop their own description and then be surprised at what you said and consider you wrong. Person doesn't have black hair, person has brown hair. I've been seeing that person for 100 pages. So don't do an info dump, but at some point you do have to get to it fairly soon. Another thing to avoid is rushing to get the info out of the way as though it's secondary to the story. When you're describing a character, as you've already mentioned, it says a great deal about them, what they can, what they can't do. It can go to their motivation. So don't rush it. Don't rush to put all the information up front, but then don't rush just to get the information out. You want to get it out in a reasonable way that I think plays to the plot line and to the action. Some people will come to this, and this is another thing to avoid, is it's a necessary evil. I've got to do this description before I can get into the action. My thinking is that's all backwards. You're not going to have much good action. You're not going to be able to describe it if we don't understand your character some. We don't know what they look like, what they're doing, how old they are, and what they think about those things. Another thing to avoid is separating character descriptions from other descriptions. I see that a fair amount where they go, here's what my character looks like. Now let's talk about the setting, and now let's talk about the problem after that. It all works together just like life. So keep those things interconnected. And then separating character descriptions from action is, I think, a big mistake. And I've got some examples of that. But let me just stop there and see if you want to add something to it. Or
No, I agree with all of those. The info dump is bad. One of the other things that we can put up there, this has more to do with physical appearance, but the mirror scenes, the waking up and looking in the mirror, and it seldom works the way we think it's working. You'd have to really kind of try and work things out to make it happen, but at some point I think it's more trouble than it's worth. So just the mirror scene is something that you can avoid. I would also, avoid, I don't think I need to say it, but avoid cliches. Thinking of a pain, like, the pain of loss or whatever the case is. These kinds of cliches that really kind of cheapen our description. Instead, you want to dig a little bit deeper and try and find some original description that's going to kind of wow the reader. It's going to be memorable, and again, put them within the character's skin.
Yeah, the mirror thing isn't horrible. It is overdone. And sometimes if it's done correctly and innovatively, it works out. I've done it a couple of times with a mirror and then sometimes a reflection in a window. But it has to really pertain. You're not just trying to trick it. The reader. There is a problem, especially if you're doing first person and the person is alone. How do you describe the person and stay in point of view? And that's always been a difficulty. And I know in the Da Vinci Code, I don't like to quote that book too much because I have some problems with it. But I thought Dan Brown, Dan Brown, not Don Brown. Don Brown's my friend and an author. Dan Brown did a good job because the guy's his character is awakened in bed, and first thing he sees, he's in a hotel and he swings his feet around. First thing he sees is a mirror, and so we get a quick description of what he looks like, but it's not a laundry list of brown hair, blue eyes, kind of thing. It's a man. He sees a very tired man, and that's what he's reacting to. So that's telling us a little bit about his state of mind, not just his physical.
So for clarification, Don Brown is your friend and an author. Dan Brown is an author, but not your friend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's how that works. Okay, I want to make sure. Right. Okay, yeah.
I've never met him.
So, with that, if your character is looking in the mirror, and you mentioned first person, how do you describe the physical description in first person? That's always the question. And so the mirror seems to be the easiest avenue for that. But I also think, like you say, it's overdone, and you get that laundry list that accompanies it. It's not what we want. Instead, I tell my students to describe the protagonist from the eyes of the other characters. So you have somebody saying, your hair looks nice today, and she thinks, well, why is he just noticing my hair now? Or I curled it. Maybe I'm glad he noticed that I curled it, or took the time that I got a haircut, or whatever the case may be. So you find a natural place for that to kind of come up. Or if you've got a self-conscious kind of a character, they may pay a little more attention to the parts of their body that they're most insecure about. I suppose if you have somebody who's super vain, they may just stare into their eyes longingly for hours until they fall into the pool and drown.
Let me show you how I did it. This is in the book The Incumbent. It's first person, female point of view, and I faced that problem. She's very good at describing other people, but I thought, how am I going to get the reader to understand what this person looks like? And especially since I'm planning 3 books in the series. And so just one paragraph in it, and I'm 17 pages in at this point before I give this physical description. And that's 17 formatted pages, book pages, not manuscript pages. It would be more in it'd be more in the manuscript. And here's what I wrote. She's going to the house of somebody she knows who has been killed. These are murder mysteries, suspense books. And so back in first person, she says, light from the street lamp spilled in through the windshield at regular intervals like a strobe light in slow motion. With each influx, I could see my reflection in the passenger side window. Staring back was a 38-year-old woman with shoulder-length brown hair, narrow nose, and weary hazel eyes. My complexion looked pale, but that was to be expected. The window was a poor mirror. It was an impromptu image, unintentional. Still, I felt pale, and that was it. That's the only real physical description we get of her.
Yeah, and you're using that to describe, you're using the outward appearance to describe the inward appearance. And the detail I think that really stands out there is the paleness, the pallor of the skin, and how she feels pale. That's to be expected in this murder mystery. There's some nerves going on. The color's going to drain from the face. And if she's looking at a reflection of herself where she doesn't necessarily recognize herself, or she's surprised at the stark contrast, or as you mentioned with Dan Brown, noticing, let's say, the purple bags under the eyes and the fatigue that's been weighing on their shoulders and that kind of stuff, then yeah, I mean, if this is something that's out of the ordinary, or if they're noticing kind of the accumulation of the outside world on their physical bodies, and it's a change for them. And I think it's a little easier to pull off kind of the reflection description at that point.
Yeah, and again, you don't want to overuse it, but I needed a way to do that so that people would have an image of her. But she also describes other people quite well, and it goes to in this particular case, it goes to the conflict she has with the police chief for the small town that she's mayor of. And I think what you're saying is absolutely what I was after, and that is that we don't separate the physical from the action. We don't separate the physical from the emotional. That's why she looked pale, but she felt pale. And that was the key. And of course, there's some foreboding in all of that. So what I did is I inserted some of the physical description to, while I was heightening the tension as she was pulling up to this house of a friend of hers who was killed. Now, when she described someone, let me give another reading here, if I may. I looked at Chief Webb. He was a stern man whom I've never seen smile. He was fit for a gentleman of 55 with just a slight middle-aged paunch over his belt. He stood 4 inches taller than my own 5'6", and his gray-streaked black hair was combed straight back and held in place by some ancient hair tonic. Now, one of the reasons I bring this up is this is how I reveal how tall she is. Mm-hmm. He stood 4 inches taller than my own 5'6", and that's how the reader finds out how tall she is. He was not the kind of man who would use gel, and the skin of his face was starting to droop as if it had grown weary of holding to the muscles beneath, and then it goes on for a little bit more. But we're seeing in her description, that's a physical description, her views, her opinions of this guy. She doesn't describe him in glowing terms.
I like that he was not a man who would use gel. That tells us about his personality, and I really like that. But is that the skin was tired of holding on to the muscles beneath? You know, that loose kind of saggy skin, like a Shar-Pei. You know, it's a very good physical description there, rather than saying he had the jowls or whatever the case is. So, yeah, some really good, some outstanding description there that's really going to kind of stick, and we get it kind of quick, and I think that's going to stick in the reader's mind throughout. So when you come back to him, the reader's still going to remember that particular character from that description. I've got an example here, and I'm going to try and do this. We're going to hope that technology works out. I'm going to screen share here, if I can do this, so you guys can read along. Let's do this, and we're going to share. And there we go. So I'm going to minimize that. And here's what I have in front of me is a very early version of a section of my Hand of Adonai series. No spoilers here. Well, maybe some. But the idea is we've got two characters. We've got Erica and Olwen. They're walking through the woods at night just before daybreak. And of course, you get... they get into some trouble. The fight ensues. So if I may read this, if you'll indulge me for a moment here, I want to kind of read it and point out some of the the descriptions that you see, the physical descriptions interwoven with kind of the action. So it says they were nearing the edge of the cerulean woods as the moon fell toward the horizon. On the opposite side, over the sea, the greater sun began to split the dark night sky with rays of orange and red. She'd not expected to make it this far without a battle, but was glad no monsters were prowling that night. Sparky, who is her, wolf, Sparky's lip curled up. He bared his teeth, and a growl rumbled from deep in his gullet. Relax, Sparky, the sun's arising. Nothing to worry about now. Olwen grabbed her shoulder. Halt, he said, staring at the ground. He pointed to a print in the dirt, something obtusely big and shaped roughly like a human foot. Erica looked at the softening earth. The print was at least 3 inches deep. There was hair, brown and black and white, stuck in the mud surrounding it. Wait, let me guess. Giants? Sasquatch, Olwen whispered. It's still close. Erica extracted her dagger. Her heart beat like hummingbirds' wings, so you see right there that internal description. So big, ugly, and scary? Sparky reared back on his haunches. They hunt at dawn, just before sun's up. He unsheathed Aiden's old sword, still stained with Naresh blood. Exactly how bad are we talking here? She whispered. Her muscles tensed, and she felt a knot in the back of her neck. We see there the tension's rising, and it's having a physical effect on her. Small ones are 8 feet tall and strong as tin baresis. The small ones, she whispered. Shh, I hear it breathing. Sparky growled. Where? Erica whispered, and then felt herself thrown straight up in the air. Branches snapped around her. She opened her eyes and started falling. She reached out for the harspice branches that tangled together, bounced off some, and finally landed on a thick branch. It hit her in the stomach and folded her in half. She hung suspended in the air nearly 12 feet from the ground. She was dizzy, and every part of her felt bruised. She found her breath, took in a deep gulp of air, and cleared the spots from her eyes. Olwen was below, rolling away from the Sasquatch and darting behind the trees. It had to be 9 feet tall. It ducked under the branches of the harspice trees. Its arms were like telephone poles. Anger welled up in her. As quickly as she could, she repositioned herself on the branch so she was sitting. Her arms stung from fingertips to elbows, from elbows to shoulders. Her back cracked and pain knifed behind her eyes. She tried to take a breath. It was slow, and inch by inch, as her chest filled with air, her ribs protested with agonizing creaks and moans. She felt a rumble in her throat and let out a fury of sharp barks, then a long guttural howl. Each came with a torturous price paid with her woeful misery. So I'll stop there, just because I don't want to take up the entire night reading this particular thing here. But you kind of get the sense there of these physical things that are going on and within her body, and the pain that she's feeling, and the sensation of flying, and the weightlessness, and all of that kind of goes into it. But it's interspersed with the action. And just so you understand that last bit there, she's a caller, so she can talk to animals. That's what she was doing. So, makes sense, right? I mean, most people can.
Yeah. Bethany says, remember, too, if you're writing in close or deep point of view, you're in the character's head and skin. The character isn't going to describe himself or herself. I'm going to disagree a little bit. Of course, it's hard to disagree with just a single sentence, but that is often done because certain things are just part of the storytelling, and the readers will accept it, like quotation marks around dialogue. When we speak, we don't do quotation marks every time we speak. Those are cues to the reader, and the reader needs to know some physical things. So the person may describe themselves. It isn't always the best choice if they're just saying, this is what I'm like. Although Sue Grafton does it. I mean, she's just very quick to it. But what she does when she describes her character, actually her character is describing herself, you're getting to know her mental state and her intelligence. She says, my name is Kinsey Milhone. I'm a private investigator licensed in the state of California, so now we know where she is. I'm 32 years old, twice divorced, no kids. The day before yesterday, I killed someone. Okay, so you see she snuck all that in. She's describing herself, but the reason is she's telling a story. So it's easier in first person because the first person narration is somebody telling a story about things they've experienced, and they want you to know, so they just start off, and they may describe themselves that way. Third person, and I think Bethany's onto something here, is it's much more difficult to do that. And that's why I think so many people default to windows and mirrors and things like that. But nonetheless, we have to have some physical quality. And I understand the hesitancy to do it. I once did one of my books, not Tarnished Image. Let me look at my books over here. Terminal Justice, and realized I was 2/3 of the way through the book and had never given a physical description of my character. In no place, no way. And then so I had to go back and drop in a little here, a little there, make sure that it fit with the text and stuff. But I've done the same thing where people haven't described characters early on, and I've assumed what they look like, and then I'm knocked off my pens when I find out the author had an entirely different image in mind.
You know, it's an interesting thing. I'd written a short story in college and did not give any physical description of the character, which I thought at the time was okay since it was a short story. Brett Anthony Johnston was my teacher at the time, and he read it and he said, there's no physical description here. So, well, I wanted the character to be able to kind of, or the reader to imagine the character how they wanted. I didn't want to give too many details about grandma because I wanted them to picture their own grandma. So I was worried that whatever description I gave, if it contradicted what the image that they had in their mind, that they, would be dissatisfied. And he says, it's an interesting thing. If if you do not give the reader details, the raw material from which they can construct their own image of your character, they will not construct any image of the character at all. Instead, if you give some good solid description and detail about your character that contradicts their image of their own grandmother, the reader will willfully disagree with it and ignore it and formulate their own picture of their own grandmother. So it's if I describe my grandmother in my story, even if my grandmother is nothing like yours, you're going to recall your own grandmother, even if those descriptions don't match. Just because the description of my character makes my character real, it makes her a grandmother, and then the reader will then transpose that to their own grandmother. And so you have to have something to work with. You've got to have those details. You've got to have that description, not just the physical description again, but kind of that physical, the inside description as well. So.
Yeah. The reader is dependent upon the writer to provide sufficient information. Otherwise, they cannot follow the story. Now, there's been experimental fiction where, people just don't describe anyone. But if you're trying to sell, you're trying to break into writing, you're probably not going to be doing experimental fiction. I know when I sit down to read, there's certain things I want to know. I don't want a laundry list. I just want to get to know the characters in the course of the action. And at some point, I want some kind of physical description of them. And then, of course, when action takes place, I want to know how they respond to it emotionally, which is the same thing as saying that there's going to be some physical description of an internal nature going on.
Yeah, indeed. I was going to mention something about the points of view, and what Bethany was saying about if they're in first person or deep point of view, that they're not going to describe themselves. I feel like we've kind of discussed this, but I just wanted to add that some characters will describe themselves. Or again, I think it kind of goes back to they'll describe something that seems off a little bit, something that's out of the norm. I always tend to read, like when I read the beginning writers who write in first person and I get the mirror scene and it's just the laundry list of description, I always feel like the character is very vain, that they're just kind of staring at themselves and falling in love with themselves all over again. And it never seems right for me. But what you've done with the incumbent in those passages that you read for us is the descriptions of the other characters came from your protagonist, and they were described in the way in which your character perceived them. So we need to remember not only the character descriptions that we get for our protagonists, we also need to our protagonists also need to be describing those that are around them, especially when you're in a first person novel, that when they are the narrator, when your protagonist is the narrator, they need to give descriptions of other characters as well. And it needs to sound like that character, like the protagonist is speaking. When you're in third person, you have a little more leeway for the author or the narrative voice to describe those auxiliary characters as necessary.
And the main character as well. So even if you're using a close third person point of view, you still have a narrator. That character isn't narrating the story. Otherwise, it'd be first person. So since you're in third person, you have an outside source who is revealing information that is known to the character. So the character knows what he looks like or she looks like. So giving that information away isn't breaking the point of view. It's not a point of view shift. And it's not going to third person distant. It is giving information that is known to the character. So since you have a narrator, you have a storyteller in third person, then you can certainly give a description. Just be creative with it. And as we're getting close to the end of time here, the thing I want to emphasize is mix it with action. So when I did the incumbent, she was driving and headed to a murder scene, or at that point an assumed murder scene in the rain. So it was part of the action. I didn't just give the laundry list. Same thing with Dean Koontz when he first introduces the town deputy of a small mountain town. The first line is, "The scream was distant and brief, a woman's scream." Well, he's not giving a description yet of the deputy until a little later when his actually just like a page later or so, it mentions that he was only 24. This was his first assignment. Okay, so now we know something. He's inexperienced. So it's important to give us that information. But it wasn't uploaded. It was just something that was added as things go along. And the Nero Wolf that I mentioned also, Aaron, you'll notice that Rex Stout does that. He gives us information through all this narration from Archie Goodwin. All these things are going on and the quipping and all the other stuff, but there's a little bit of information that comes out, and it makes for great storytelling.
It's always nice to be in the hands of an author who can juggle, who can balance, the interior monologue, the dialogue, the outward events, the actions that's happening, the descriptions of the setting. When you can get that juggled properly and you've got, all those balls in the air, it's hard not to drop any. But as a reader, what a pleasure it is to read prose where they've got all these balls in the air and they're being caught and they're being thrown in the right way, and so you get the sense that this is a master writer. This is somebody who understands how to intermix these, how to weave them together, if you want to use that particular metaphor, into some sort of tapestry, if you will, into some sort of mural almost. It's really nice. Like they're like little splashes of colors, and when you move them all together, they create their own image, and that's what's really beautiful about it. So absolutely, I agree with that.
Yeah, and Rex Stout does that so well. I know the first time I was reading it, it took me a little bit to understand that Nero Wolfe was very heavy. But he doesn't come out, Rex Stout doesn't come out and tell us that. Archie Goodwin doesn't tell us that. He jokes a little bit about it. He talks about how the poor guy has to take a couple of efforts to get out of his specially made chair. You wonder why the chair is specially made, and how he has to hoist himself out, and steady himself and other such things. Then you begin to pick up, well, this guy is probably very large. And then later he'll start dropping in the eighth of a ton and other such things with that. But he lets us discover it. Doesn't tell us. He lets us discover it in the telling. And that worked, I think, very well.
Yeah, it definitely goes back to that whole show don't tell thing. So, which we've discussed, I think, quite some length. So, very, very good. Well, we are coming up here on time. Bethany says, agreed, but that's a little like her State of the Union. It's just got to come out as an honest observation or a regret at how much they've changed. Something that doesn't sound like author intrusion even from the beginning. Readers only need a few key details. I like that. We only need those few key details. A few key details is always going to be better than lots of mediocre details. One unique description is always better than three kind of cliches. So finding those little gems are very valuable as well.
True.
Yeah. You have anything else to add for us, Pops, before we sign off?
No, I think we've worked them hard enough here. Other than to say that really the best thing to do is pull down some good novels and go at them, the early pages, with the goal of saying, what do I learn about the main character and other important characters, and when do I learn it? And see what they do.
Yep.
See how they handled it. And you do enough of those, and pretty soon you get a feel for it.
Absolutely. Keep asking yourself, how does my character physically feel? What's it like to be inside of their skin at this moment? Finding precise language to describe what that is like, and not all the way throughout your entire novel, but just at the appropriate places, the right places. Again, weave it together with all your other descriptions. It can be very, very powerful stuff. So, Pops, where can people get a hold of you?
Well, I'm still going to say best thing to do is go to altongansky.com, and from there you can bridge over to things. For those especially new to writing, jump over to my writers conference, BRMCWC, Blue Ridge Mountain Christian Writers Conference, BRMCWC. I did a post yesterday about how to format a manuscript. So if that's of interest to anyone listening, to see what a manuscript looks like, how to formulate it. Now, again, I'm not talking about while you write, but what you turn in. And it gave some hints on the regular formatting is. So if that's new to anyone, go over there and pick up a little hint.
Excellent. And as always, you guys can find me at aarongansky.com, or this weekend you can find me at the Orange County Christian Writers Conference, occwc.org. You can swing by. I don't know if you are able to register anymore. I think the window is passed, but you can find out more information about that Writers Conference, maybe sign up for next year. There's some fun stuff going on down there. I'll be there. I'll be on a panel talking about publishing options. I will be leading a class on honing your senses, and digging for originality, finding unique ways to describe things. So should be a lot of fun. And I know I'm going to see, I think, a couple of you out there, a couple of our viewers, Molly Jo, I think, and Becky are going to be down there as well. So should be a good time. And just as always, thank you guys for listening. And until good week. Wow. It's been a long night. Thanks all for listening. It is the fly. Oh, next week is emotional writing. How to write emotion without sentimentality. So should be a fun topic. So until next week, good writing.